Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this is the podcast for you. What is happening, amigos? Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Today, we're doing another hunt recap from a couple of special few days spent in South East Queensland. What we had was another generous offer from a few very good hunting mates where Ayden and I transitioned from our venture hunt. If you haven't listened to that podcast, go and listen to last week's episode where we spent an initial couple of days in South East Queensland and Ayden was lucky enough to be successful on a fantastic red stag. And then what we did was we transitioned to another hunting camp only just over the hill really with a couple of our close friends, and we had two dads and their young sons in camp with us. It was an awesome atmosphere, some great vibes, and got amongst plenty of red stags. So in this podcast, we're going to dive into the topics of hunting with kids, the old quantity versus quality saga that is South East Queensland, once again, strategies for calling red deer in during the middle of the day, and a successful hunt personally from me, as well as touching on your FAQs. If you have any FAQs or frequently asked questions, make sure to email them to info@twinelements.com with the subject line FAQ, or equally send them through as a DM or message on social media. So you can reach us at Twin Elements Instagram account or James Doumtsis Outdoors or Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors. So without further ado, we'll jump into the podcast. Venture Hunting and Outdoors is Australia's premier hunting retailer, with the mission to give Australian outdoorsmen and women the resource they deserve. Venture started from a team of passionate hunters and has transformed into a community. Through group events, top quality gear, exclusive deals, and expert guidance, Venture is more than a hunting store. Check out their website today to see what epic deals are available. So in this hunt, we had two fathers and two sons that had generously invited Ayden and I to spend a couple of days chasing some red stags on a few different properties. We were going to be mainly situated and based on one central camp and one central property, with the opportunity to go to other properties, looking for stags and whatnot. And that was mainly around, I'd actually been there with this hunting group last year, which was, a fantastic camp. And it was mainly just around us going in there and probably teaching a little bit of how we sort of hunt during the rut. So there was a little bit of like education and training and stuff, but also just that camaraderie and spending time with great people in hunting camp during the rut and raw. And one of our first hunts that we went on, one of the dads sort of said to us, would there be the potential for Ayden and I, like he realised that we were trying to film as much Twin Elements content and media as possible, which obviously is a hard task in itself when you've got more people on the hunt. But he just sort of expressed that, his son is a massive fan of what we do and also just really wanted to go out and sort of hunt with us. The son in himself was, I'd say, a very seasoned hunter, only being 11 years old, but from the stories that his dad and the opportunities that his dad had given him, like Ayden and I take our hat off to him. Like he'd taken him out plenty of times, already started teaching his son how to butcher animals. His son had seen a few animals get shot and whatnot, mainly with a rifle. But his dad had instilled a lot of knowledge and training into his son already. So Ayden and I was like, yep, absolutely. Definitely keen to take him out. Obviously sort of set up a few guidelines in the sense of like, we're going to be filming stuff as well, which obviously, like we said, makes things difficult, but we're more than enthusiastic to take this young fella out on the hunt with us.
Yeah, to be honest, it reminded me a lot of our youth and the experiences that our dad afforded to us through just obviously a little bit of sacrifice on his behalf and, putting in the effort to take us out as kids. And this father was super, super passionate about it. You could just feel that definitely. He was really passionate about one, giving his son opportunities that maybe he hadn't had with his dad or hadn't necessarily got to experience as a kid. And part of that is just spending time doing these cool outdoor pursuits. They're right into their cycling, fitness, hunting, all these different things. And it was really cool just to see that translate in this young family, and then obviously reminding us of all the experiences that we got to do with our dad. So for us, to be honest, I was a little bit nervous taking this young kid out on a hunt. Like you often have got to think, like we got there and I hadn't actually thought about taking, another human, let alone a kid out on a hunt. So it's hard enough sometimes on these hunts, making sure that you're fed, watered, getting enough sleep, all these types of things. And then to be taking a kid out on the hill where there are bugs and bites and, things like foods that you can get allergic reactions to and things. Like I remember offering him some cashew nuts and being like, geez, I hope you're not allergic to these actually. And he's like, no, I'm not allergic to anything. And it was just like a bit of a relief. But there's so many unknowns, I guess, when you're out hunting and then, taking someone out who's a lot younger and then obviously in your responsibility is a big thing. And it was cool to actually experience that. And to be honest, made me very excited for one day when I'm, settle down and obviously have kids of my own to be able to undertake that pathway. So it really was a rewarding experience.
And it was sort of interesting for me because in a lot of ways, like what we said, his dad had prepared him really well for hunting, let alone not like hunting with us. Like, because I think the big thing was, and kids are obviously elastic at that age of prime 11 years old, but he was like, there was one stage where he sort of struggled a little bit, maybe not even like, I wouldn't like say a lot, but just when we were walking up the hill, you could see he was sucking it in. But I mean, we were all sucking it in. And, how are you going, mate? And he's like, yeah, my calves hurt a little bit. It's like, oh, do you want to stop? He's like, no, we'll keep going. So that was really cool just to see him sort of pushing himself. And he was fit. Like he was, really fit young fella. And, did like, sadly, the thing, I guess, when you're walking the mountains is when you're walking downhill, you walk quite slowly because you're probably scanning and glassing the other hill. But when it comes to the walking up the next sort of little ridge or finger gully or whatever, you're normally just boosting straight to the top. And then as you get to the top, you start slowing down and glassing sort of the top of the ridge and whatnot. So, there was a couple of little sprints and stuff. And he was fine. And I think for me, it was just more just checking in with him constantly. It's like, hey, mate, are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Like Ayden and I obviously have camel packs. So we were drinking. He had bottles in my bag and stuff. And, it's like, oh, do you want a drink? It's like, nah, I'm all good. Are you hungry? Nah, I'm all good. And his dad had packed him like a massive plethora of snacks. Like we'd sort of expressed to his dad, like we normally hunt well into the morning, if not into sort of the early afternoon as our morning hunt. So, just saying like, we're going to have food, but just make sure you pack plenty for him as well. Like happy to carry as much as you want to pack. And so he had like a heap of muesli bars and end up, they're from South Africa. So we end up having, some jerky and, different types of sausage and stuff like that, or salamis that were really good. And he shared with us and, it was a fantastic time. And I think the big thing was just for me, just checking in constantly. Are you tired? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? And I mean, like he was pretty honest, like which was great that he could, like I'd met him the year before for a day, but for him too to just have the confidence to say to two random guys, I guess as well, like even the fact of like going to the toilet, which sounds like pretty, like us. Even if I hunt with randoms for the first time or I'm guiding someone, whether it be a guy or a girl, I guess you just walk off like 10 meters or 15 meters and then you go to the toilet or whatever. Or, like if you're hunting with girls, it might be, like they go, hey, I need to go to the toilet and go. And it's all fairly similar stuff. When it's a kid, like, I don't know, if you're almost like, hey, do you need to go to the toilet? Whereas he would just like confidently walk off and go to the toilet and it was all like, everything was great. And like he had the confidence to be like, hey, I'm thirsty or hey, I'm hungry or whatever. Or, like even in the fitness scenario, hey, do you want to stop? And he's like, no, I'm good. Like, like he was a really, really good kid. And I guess, like Ayden said, it made us super excited to have kids one day that we can hopefully take out. And hopefully our kids do as well as what this little fella did, because he was an absolute pleasure to take out. So hopefully, in the future we can catch up with him again and take him out. But it was really different for us, I guess, when we're trying to like balance the filming side and also sort of not look after someone, because he pretty much looked after himself. But it was definitely a different atmosphere and one that was different and enjoyable.
Yeah, it's definitely funny, sort of discussing with the kids and then obviously the parents afterwards, because the kids like sort of went home and we continued the hunt with both of the dads. And it's funny seeing what their kids' takeaways were from the trip. Like we thought, getting a stag on the deck later on in the trip would have been part of their highlights, whereas it was actually waking up at 4 a.m. and getting to have bacon and egg brekkie with hash browns. And that's what they told their sisters and their mums and stuff back home. He's like, yeah, we had this big, brekkie on the mountain. and it's just cool. I guess kids are very impressionable and very enthusiastic. So being able to sort of obviously, try and make it as comfortable and as fun as possible. And to be honest, we try to work, especially we discuss this with the fathers and try to work with the kids and do like a short, sharp session. So they were sort of only with us for like a day and a half, 2 days max. Just because we did acknowledge that as hyper focused as we are with our bow hunting and filming and all this type of stuff, for them to be hiking up and down the mountains, these early starts, late finishes and what not, as fun as it is and as much of like an emotional roller coaster it is for them, it's also very tiring, and kids get tired far quicker than us, and don't know that, it will get better or you can do this for a longer period of time. For them, they start feeling those muscle pains and whatnot, and they probably stop having as much fun as we do. We know that the more effort you put in, the more likely you are to succeed later and things like that. And that just comes with maturity, I guess, and being adults. But we obviously made the decision. Well, not we didn't. We supported the decision from the fathers that the boys were going to go home with their mothers and go back to school or school holidays, whatever they're on at the moment. But it was really a bit of a takeaway for us. Is like as amazing as the hunt was for that short period of time with the boys. I actually really respected that the dads sort of knew when to cut it, so that not to make the trip, more difficult for the boys, or fade away into what was a really amazing hunt, and then sort of go into them getting tired or them having less expectations on how good the hunt was.
Yeah, I think it was just leaving them like still anticipating to come out rather than like, because sometimes it sounds strange, but hunting isn't fun. Like sometimes when, when you're grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding, like there's almost just an element of persistence and almost stubbornness that comes with, some of these higher end hunts when you're like trying to get it done, and, like you're really trying to look for that, that bull elk or a lifetime, or a tara of a lifetime, or a stag or a lifetime, and you just, you're putting in all the work and you're not getting the result. And like obviously it's that type 2 fun where you look back on it like in May or June, and you're like, oh shit, when's April going to roll around already? And but sometimes when you're in the middle of it, it's really not that fun. And I think that's where it's important with kids, especially at that early age where you're trying to get them into it. You really want them to leave on that sort of type 1 fun, like have that fond memory, like, oh, that was so great. Like like it's almost like a punishment that I'm leaving. Whereas with us, it's like, often when we're hunting, like, yes, it's definitely a lot of fun and we love it, like every moment of it. But like, you look back and like, you're like, oh God, that was such a good hunt. After the fact that you've sort of forgotten the fact that your legs are burning and how tired you were, and, the late nights and the early starts and the kilometers walked and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh God, I wish we could be back in that now. And it's just like, yeah, but now you're in like the comfort of your own home, and, everything's warm and cozy and easy. And, so yeah, just that was definitely an important takeaway for me as well.
I think also it was interesting when the young fella went home and his dad said it was actually a little bit, tough for him to leave because he did have so much fun. And again, going back to how impressionable kids are, and I actually felt this myself, and it was actually a bit of an honor hearing like how, how much of a good time this young lad has had with us, because I could liken it very much to my youth. And I remember going on hunts, and there's something too, as a young person, your parent who you spend, that's your avenue into adulthood, and people is basically who your parents know. Like, you don't really meet older people through anything else. So I remember like we obviously hunted with our dads and then our dad's friends or our family or our uncles and whatnot. And I remember being, I don't know, probably around the same age, around 10 or so, and going on hunts with, I still remember with Brad and Kane, for example, who were basically family friends. We called them like our uncles, is basically how we were introduced to them, just because, my dad respected them so much to be able to take us out and be in hunting camp and whatnot. And they basically were family and our family still. And I remember genuinely being upset to the point of tears after spending like 5 days hunting in New South Wales for pigs and goats and having to say goodbye to Brad, because as a young fella, I remember thinking, I'm not going to see this guy again. And, it sounds silly, but like I might not see him again ever. But realistically, I'll probably see him again next school holidays when we're out there doing the exact same thing. But it's hard to rationalize that as a young person. And I think having that impact on a young person's life, it was a bit sad hearing that, he'd had such a good time, but it was a little bit sad to leave, because I could assimilate to that as a young person. But obviously, now just trying to maintain that connection and, assuring him that, yeah, we'll get out for a hunt again. Hopefully next time he can bring his rifle, or we can go and do something for goats or rabbits or whatever, so he can hunt a bit more. Like, it's just, yeah, it's important. And I think, again, hunting with kids, it's super challenging, but it's super rewarding being able to help like mold and shape people. And that's something that both of these parents are doing a really amazing job with their kids. And I think people that do outdoor activities and hunting and things like that in general, whether it's hiking, fishing, skiing, whatever it is, all of these, mothers and fathers out there raising kids in the outdoors tend to be doing a really good job, which is great. Whether it's hunting, fishing, hiking, or any other activity in the great outdoors, Dog and Gun Coffee is ready to fuel your adventures. Their preloaded drip filters are a game changer and help you enjoy cafe quality coffee in the wild. Their dark roast, the Samba blend, is my personal favourite. The legends over at Dog and Gun Coffee have extended their support to you to help us discover your brew of choice today. Use code TWIN10, that's numerical number 10, at checkout for $10 off your first order.
We were lucky enough to take one of the fathers out hunting as well. He just sort of says similarly, like, hey, can I come on a hunt with you guys and just sort of learn, what you guys do and how you do it and stuff like that. Like, obviously Ayden had been successful, a couple of days prior, and he just wanted to sort of see how we, not only like he had a genuine interest in the twin element side, like the filming side, especially because, it's a lot easier filming a twin elements film when we're filming a subject. So, for example, like Ayden and I are both on the cameras, both on the tools and filming someone. It's a lot easier when that's going on as opposed to like all of this, right? Ayden and I have been running two cameras and filming each other, which is quite a difficult task. Like, there's a lot of gear that you got to carry, but it's also just like trying to be able to capture that story line and really sort of document the whole hunt in the best potential and full form when you've got like a short lens where you're mainly filming sort of the hunter, the subject, and then having to carry these big telescopic, I guess, lenses and film all the wildlife stuff and like the red deer as they're coming in and calling and stuff like that. Like, it's a massive task. So he said, look, I'm happy to carry some camera gear, really interested in seeing what you guys do, but also just wanted to see how we hunt from a like a calling situation, because he's mainly been a rifle hunter but really interested in sort of getting into bow hunting into the future a bit more. So we got up early on a central ridge, as we always sort of do, first light, and as typical, as we were saying in the last podcast, like, we didn't really need to do, like, I like roaring, so I was doing a fair bit of roaring, but when you've got stags going off, you don't really need to roar and do location roars, because you've got, like, it sort of ended up being that we had probably 7 or 8 different stags roaring in sort of different locations, and so we sort of set out, I guess, to go to where the nucleus of roaring was going on. There was probably 3 or 4 stags roaring in this area. And so we sort of traversed the ridge around to get better eyes on these stags, I guess, and close the distance to where the roaring was going on.
Yeah, pretty quickly, similar to basically podcast number 1 from Red Deer Camp, we worked out that majority of the stags were quite young, which was fine. And I think a learning curve here, or something that this hunter that we were with took away, was basically how willing we were to walk away from deer to find the deer that we were after. And again, if it was him hunting and he had, his rifle or bow and wanted to shoot the deer, then fine, we would have put effort into trying to get one of those on the deck. Whereas for James and I, we were trying to target something a bit more mature and obviously get like a mature animal on the deck. So seeing that these stags were, young 2x2s and 3x3s and whatnot, and some of them may have been holding a hind and doing these real guttural roars and sounding more impressive than what they were, we basically looked over them, gave a bit of due time, did a few roars just to double check that there was nothing, that we weren't seeing that was potentially hidden away in a gully a bit closer and wanted to spark up to our roar. Nothing really happened, and we basically watched them for 5 or 10 minutes, saw some cool stuff, stags chasing each other and spikers running around crazy and hinds calling and whatnot. And it's amazing to see that type of stuff in what is the red deer roar. But we very quickly put some more miles underfoot and try to cover, during that prime time, as much country as we could, looking for something a bit more mature. And it turns out that we didn't really for that morning, but what we did do, which was pretty cool, was we actually had marked in the back of our heads probably 3 or 4 stags that were actually over the boundary fence that we thought, oh, we'll come back to later on and see if we can sort of coax them out from, because, we wanted to hunt as much of the huntable country that we could. And then, it was just, we always, when we're doing these location rules and trying to find where the deer are in the morning, is making a note of, okay, there's 1 stag there, 2 over there, 3 in that gully, 4 there. I've got eyes on all of those. That one's still a mystery. That one's a question mark. We'll go back and check those later because the wind might not be right or the situation might not be right or whatever. And we just, rather than spend hours trying to, see 1 stag, we just played the odds of trying to see 5 to 10 stags, for example, for that morning.
Yeah, Ayden definitely harped on something that I wanted to stress in South East Queensland, and even like anywhere there's good deer numbers. And that is like one of the most important things, and I can't remember which podcast, but I've certainly said it before, is like when we're getting up high first thing in the morning, well before first light, like it's not necessarily that we're hearing, like we just want to sit there and hear stags roar for half an hour, but it's actually identifying the location on the ridge that the stag is at, because some stags will move a lot during a morning between just say sun up and 9 o'clock in the morning, but most of the time they're going to be sort of in that general facility that you can kick them up later on in the day with location rule. And so what we actually did this morning was like what Ayden was saying, like he made a mental note, I made a mental note, and it's like, okay, there's a stag roaring there. He's probably over the boundary fence. There's a couple of stags roaring up there. They might be on our place, but they're pretty close to the boundary fence. We had this nucleus that we went and checked out first. It ended up having 6 young stags, a couple carrying on and whatever. And then we had one that we'd seen the day before, like roaring in a spot. And so what we then went and did was we went and ticked off essentially each one of these stags looking for a mature stag. And so we went into the first spot where there was the nucleus of mayhem going on. And like what Ayden said, we were across from the ridge and we were able to identify 6 different stags in this area. Only 3 of them were roaring, but there was, all the satellite younger stags hanging around as well. There was a couple of spikers and whatnot. If you wanted to count them, there was more than 6 stags then. But what we're essentially doing is going through a tick box list in our mind and being like, yeah, okay, well, these roars have all been identified. And then we happily that we'd identified all the stags in that area that had been roaring and stuff. Like, yes, there may have been a big mature stag hidden somewhere in the thick stuff that was roaring. But for us sitting there in that time and then roaring and like that with that many satellite stags and whatnot around, you'd figure that if there was a big mature stag, he'd most likely be roaring as well and saying like, piss off to the satellites. Because we saw that like there was only 2 hinds on the hill and the stag that was holding him was a 5x5. That we'll tell a story about later on, but he was the most mature stag. There was other stags roaring just on benches and stuff everywhere else, and then satellites in between and spikers in between trying to run and pinch those hinds and stuff like that. But if there was a more dominant stag there, he probably would have been with those hinds. But equally, he would have been with, like he might have been with other hinds further up, but he should have been roaring. And so all the stags that were roaring we were able to identify, plus a few more satellites. And so confidently then being like, okay, we're pretty confident that we've, ticked off all the stags in this area. We're going to move. And so we're moving and covering country quite quickly. So from that point then we turned and I started doing sort of location roars every 500 meters or so, I guess. And we're covering country and pretty much just walking. And I'd get a stag to roar and then we'd move in on it. And by the time we were able to get to where these other stags had sort of been roaring, I guess, on sort of the boundary fence and whatnot, the day was sort of starting to get away from us. I guess it was probably 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. And what we ended up doing was setting up and doing sort of a bit of a later morning or lunchtime calling session.
Yeah, so as James referred to just before, the lunchtime calling scenarios is basically what we referred to as almost restarting the party. By this time, a lot of the deer had sort of lulled off and the roaring was pretty much not existent at that point. It was between like that 9, 10, maybe even a little bit later. And this is where, speaking in reflection with the person that we're hunting with, it was interesting to hear, like he said, I would have turned around and gone home because they'd stopped roaring, or maybe hunted like a gully back hoping for a pig or something like that, but I wouldn't have really been hunting red deer. Whereas for us, like we knew that these deer were in the vicinity. So, we would sit there happily all day hoping that it's the roar, for example. It's the best time that one hind might break from, a harem, and a stag might chase her across the hill, and you just see that movement and go, yep, there's a stag there. It might get to 11 a.m. and a stag might roar and then walk down to his wallow. Like for us, we're trying to always hunt. The morning hunts for us will often go through till midday, even early afternoon, and then by that time, sometimes we'll stay out in the mountain and just continue hunting into the afternoon and evening. But yeah, what we tried to do in this instance was pretty much, restart the party and get these stags on their feet and roaring again.
And so the way that we did that was cold calling, and that was just intermittently throwing out. Like we knew there was a couple of stags. Like we'd done a location roar and had a couple of stags respond, and we were probably, I'd say 800 meters away from most of them. We were set up probably 300 meters over the boundary fence, just with the way that the wind was at that time. The thermals had switched, but they were still sucking down a little bit. So we were fairly high up off sort of a gully that was running down into the boundary or the neighbor's place. And we set up and started calling. And our first sort of guest came, I don't know, probably 10 to 15 minutes after we'd started calling, which was just a young 3x3. And he ended up coming into probably 15 meters. Like we saw him pop up over the ridge, maybe 150 meters away. He'd come in completely silent. We gave a little hind call just to encourage him, and he came sprinting in. It was pretty cool actually, because he let out a few little like he was sort of trying to find us, I guess, and gave a few little vocalizations, which was always cool to see. And what we ended up doing was we ended up sitting there for probably I don't know, maybe half an hour to 45 minutes, and we'd do a couple of hind calls. And I think another thing that was interesting, like, because it's just, I don't know, like Ayden and I are pretty set in our ways, I guess, of how we operate and call and hunt and everything like that. So it's always interesting getting other people's perspectives. And one thing that this extra hunter sort of said to us, like, he's like, I didn't realize how loud you'd be calling, because I guess, like, so this red 3x3 or whatever he was that came in, that was doing like a little like, like he was doing it quite, like if you were 100 meters away, you'd probably struggle to hear it. Whereas when Ayden and I are doing hind calls, if we're only 50 to 100 meters away from a stag, or we're calling him in, like, yes, it will most likely be fairly quiet. But if we're trying to call this stag in, for example, that we did call from 800 meters away, well, we're literally cupping our hands around our mouth and doing it as loud as we possibly can. And he could hear us, like he's responding. Like we'd do one, like it'd be completely silent, and we'd do one, and then two stags would roar. So it's just important to note that, in the sense that, like, you're really trying to project yourself. And often we were actually just using hind calls as much as we were location roars. We were almost doing like location hind calls. And what happened was, I guess we'd sort of been in this spot. This stag had been going backwards and forward for probably half an hour, 45 minutes, and we hadn't really got the outcome that we were looking for, which essentially is him coming in. And so what we decided to do was, with the wind being a little bit better, we end up moving down the gully about 200 meters, so that we're only probably 100 meters off the boundary fence and down further in the gully closer to where he was. And we started hind calling again, gave like a pretty, I guess, significant sort of outlay of hind calls, probably a minute of quite intense hind calling and fawn calling and stuff like that. And you could hear him get really, really worked up. And then what ended up happening was he ended up moving and starting to move. And that's what we sort of said on the last podcast. Like, we found that when stags were calling, and then went silent, or when stags even moved in any direction, the fact is they're probably coming in. And so this stag, I think because of the echo of us being up on a ridge and hind calling down into a gully, he was a bit confused where the hind calls were coming from. And so he ended up doing a massive loop and coming in to us. But the important note is, we actually had another stag that, in that time that he did his massive loop for 10 or 15 minutes, that actually came in quietly behind us as well, and that was a different 4x4. And he came in completely quiet, and like literally walked into what, like, Ayden was a bit scared through the... Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, to be honest, I was viewing him through the viewfinder and trying to like rack manual focus as he approached from like 50 meters, because he virtually came in completely silent until he was about 40, 50 meters away, gave one roar, and it nearly got confused with this other stag that was roaring intently from, a couple hundred meters away over the ridge that we hadn't laid eyes on. And both James and I looked and were like, that's a different stag. And as soon as we turned our heads back behind us, the stag was like right there coming in. So he'd obviously like roared on the move and was closing in on, this array of hind calls that he was searching for. And he basically walked into 2 meters. Like I feel like I nearly could have reached out and touched him. And through the viewfinder, I was kind of a bit startled because where he'd walked to was between these two great big trees and pretty much like dead on to me. And I just figured if he wins me or sees me or smells me and just puts his head down and runs through the gap, I'm basically going to get skewered. But fortunately for me, you can see like the whites of his eyes and nostrils flare as he sort of smells me at like 2 meters on the downwind side. And he pretty much does this little pirouette and rolls back out there as quickly as he come and then bounds off the mountain. He did this massive leap and traveled, I don't know, almost like 9 feet before hitting the ground. And it was pretty cool to watch. But just as quickly as he sort of got out of there, that other stag was starting to make his way in quite interestedly. Born out of necessity, Day 6 designs and builds specialised equipment for hunters. Their arrows are bomb-proof and consistent. I'm currently running their 275 spine shafts. The split between the usual 250 and 300 spine shaft is perfect for the heavier broadhead that we run. Coming in at 11.8 grains per inch, this setup is perfect for all game here in Australia and beyond.
And yeah, after a few hind calls, he made his way in. Interestingly enough, it was a bit disappointing, I'm not going to lie, with this hunt because he, like what you said, I'm a firm believer that you can't tell what a red stag sounds like or how good a red stag is from the sound of his roar because if you could, this fella would have been given all the right indications in the sense of he was down in some really thick timber in a deep dark gully, was roaring quite aggressively and doing roars that made me think that he probably had hinds that he'd left to come to us. And so I was anticipating that he was going to be quite a mature animal and was a little bit disappointed when he jumped the fence and came plodding over just to find out that he was a 3x3 and probably only a couple of years old. So he ended up coming in and as he went down into the gully, the wind actually shifted and he actually winded us and ran off. So it was probably good that he wasn't at a mature animal that we were interested in. But it was just cool to, I guess, lay eyes on and see so many animals in a day, and especially to share a bit of knowledge with fellow hunters and stuff. Just obviously in more of a practical setting, like we try and share with you guys through this podcast our knowledge and increase the likelihood of you being successful in hunts. But obviously, sort of replicating that in a live situation and showing someone exactly how we do it. So hopefully now with us sharing these sort of hunting stories, I guess that sort of highlights and really puts a bit more detail into our calling strategies. And we sort of finished the morning by continuing down the ridge. We actually, did a location roar, probably 5. Like we had just say 2.5 k's of boundary fence back to camp, and we, in my mind, I had one more stag that I knew was over the boundary fence that I wanted to tick off, and we probably moved about 700 meters down that fence and gave a roar, and he gave a roar. And by now we're talking like 1:30 in the afternoon or probably 12:30, something like that, like very much middle of the day. And I said in my mind, okay, I picked a tree on top of the ridge about 700 meters down the ridge. And I'm like, I want to do another call from there. So I moved down to that tree, did another call and did nothing, didn't roar to a location roar. But then gave 2 hind calls and straight away he sparked up. And I was like, okay, perfect, here we go. And he was actually a fair bit further than what I'd anticipated he was. And so we got back up on the march and went to another tree that I sort of picked out. And straight away we got to there and we were up on the ridge and he was still over the boundary fence, probably about 200 meters. And it was interesting. We sort of gave a couple of hind calls and he started, carrying on. Sounded like he was coming in, but what he was actually doing was chasing his own hind around. But it was enough for Ayden and I to identify that he wasn't a shooter and was just another young stag. And so it was pretty funny because then straight away we're like, okay, well, let's go. Like, we're not in that situation. It probably would have been pretty hard to call him in. Like we're probably more likely to call the hind in, I reckon, in that situation. But yeah, anyway, it was a stag that we were interested in shooting. And so we were pretty keen on getting back to camp and just sort of relaxing before heading out for the afternoon. But it was great that we were able to, like, I think for the day we ended up laying eyes on and identified something like 12 to 13 stags for a sort of, whatever, 5:30 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon session. None, obviously, which we were sort of keen on taking, but it was just cool to be amongst plenty of action and be able to call those deer in from such a long way. So definitely a tactic that has worked, wonders for us this rut.
So hearing of all the excitement and action that we'd had that morning with one of our good mates and hunter, we had got back to camp, had a bit of a bite to eat, and the other hunter in camp had said that he was a little bit jealous and wanted to basically get out with us that afternoon and try and target his first red deer with the bow. So we'd shifted tactics, left our bow or James's bow in camp, and we'd marched up the ridge. We were probably leaving a little bit late just because the morning hunt had got away from us and we did get back to camp late. So by the time we got up on the mountain, it was probably around 4 o'clock and we only really had time to settle in for one good sort of calling situation. So being the objective of this hunt, with trying to get a stag or just a deer on the deck, really mostly a stag, but weren't too picky in terms of age or maturity or anything like that. We basically just took this hunter straight back to that nucleus that we'd identified that morning. So with the thermals shifting up the hill, we actually came in from the opposite side of where we were glassing that morning and basically got into position and got to where we assumed that the deer would be. And just as we were about to start calling, we actually spotted, a hind and a yearling just moving around in the scrub. So that gave us a good indication that the stag or a stag would be nearby. And we basically dropped down the ridge a little bit, got the wind right, and started making a few calls.
And as soon as we dropped down the ridge and started calling, we had Ayden situated up probably 70 meters behind us, calling, and the bow hunter and I moved in down the hill a little bit, and I could see the stag probably 150 meters away walking around with these hinds. So we started giving out a couple of like hind calls and whatnot, and straight away he started responding, and it was a bit of a pain because we ended up calling in two yearlings, two sub 30 meters, and they were just sort of sitting in front of us calling as well and like chirping around like trying to find these other fawns or other hinds. And it was great in the sense that it dragged him up to about 50 meters and then he turned to go back to the hind, because I had originally thought it was a hind, a fawn, and then he was behind them, and I was like, oh, we're like so on here, like this is going to be perfect, he's going to get his first stag. And as soon as I realized it was two fawns, I was like, that really loses its like sort of I don't know, like the pull power, I guess, of that stag, like coming along, knowing that the fawns came, but the hinds were like further back down. And so that's pretty much what he did. Like he came up, got to about 50, gave a roar, turned around and went back to those hinds, which then put us in a really poor position. And go take my hat off and actually say like Ayden read it like absolutely perfectly. And he couldn't really see us and I couldn't sort of see Ayden, but he just knew that those fawns were going to be like super close to us, which they were, like sub 30. And he just stopped calling because obviously like if those fawns kept coming past us and then winded us, like it's hard to say what, like if they ran off and were barking and carrying on and stuff, like that's obviously most likely not going to be helpful for our situation. Like, I mean, it could have been the thing that brought the stag in. Like it's sort of hard to tell, but you'd think that most likely alarm calls in that situation's an animal and deer running away. Like sometimes deer running can be a bit of a draw and a distraction stuff, but it also can be like a what the hell's going on and then them running off. So Ayden just timed it perfectly and stopped calling, and we ended up having to wait about half an hour, which did suck a fair bit of time for this arvo hunt up, I guess. But yeah, they then went to move sort of back and sort of up the hill to go.
Yeah, from my perspective, my job was essentially to paint the picture that there were hinds up on this ridge, sort of behind where we were hoping that the stag would walk through within bow range on his way up to these hinds and fawns that were up on the ridge where I was. So I was about 70 meters behind James and the hunter, and they were in a pretty good position where they were tucked in the gully. And I, to be honest, could only see the top of James's head, but I couldn't see if he put his hand up or did anything. I couldn't see any hand signals for him to say stop or anything. So I was just trying to read it that when I was doing these hind calls and these two fawns or yearlings started making their way in, I was actually sort of optimistic that the hunter, hadn't shot a red deer before, that he was nearly maybe going to take one for meat or something like that. Like a yearling would be an awesome animal, but he held his nerve and was waiting for a stag, which was great. But I also stopped because I figured that I'd done my job at that point. I'd drawn these deer in from, a couple hundred meters away to, 70 odd meters from me, and then well within bow range for the other boys. And I figured that with James's knowledge, that if I just stopped, not knowing that if I was going to add more good or harm by continuing to call, the last thing I wanted to do from my perception was drag those hinds, or yearlings, sorry, like past the boys and get winded and then spook. And as James just said, like have them run off and, create a bit of chaos. So my idea was, okay, I can't see the stag. I'm assuming he's behind these yearlings, or the hinds are going to come up to gather their yearlings. The yearlings are within bow range. They're in a pretty good spot. I'm just going to sit here and wait. And for me, that sort of lull, as James said, it took about half an hour. Those yearlings just stopped. And as it turns out, talking to the boys, were there within bow range, like 20 odd meters for half an hour, just feeding and stuff in this lush little gully. But what eventually happened, and I was tossing up the whole time because I was aware that like light was going to be a factor in trying to get this stag into range within bow light and shooting light and stuff like that. So I'd actually made up in my head that I wasn't going to hind call again, but if that stag roared, I was going to get my roaring tube out and start acting like another stag has come in from up on a dominant position and coming down to take those little hinds and fawns. And he ended up calling, I called, he called, and I could feel his aggression getting higher through the roof. And that's where I actually acknowledged that, because I couldn't see him, this was all just playing on audio cues. I actually acknowledged that it must have been working because, again, and part of this decision making of roaring and not hind calling was that the roar hopefully was going to be a male to male communication, like two blokes at the bar, and hopefully the girls, in the case of these little fawns, were just going to continue having their drinks and having their feed in that lush little gully and be sitting there waiting, within bow range. So when he roared, I roared. And again, those little yearlings kind of looked up the hill because I could see them. I couldn't see the hunters and James. They looked up the hill and then just continued feeding. So I was like, perfect, this is working. Like if he roars, I'll continue roaring and matching his tone and, timing and stuff, as we've discussed in previous podcasts. And it worked really well, too well, to the point where he come in thinking that there was this other, stag up the hill. As James said, he come into about 50 meters and then sort of like roared and must have said, come on girls, we're going back to your parents. And these two little yearlings sort of up and left and followed him over the ridge. So I was hoping he was going to come in and do that another 20 or 30 meters closer to the hunter. But yeah, it just was a little bit unfortunate that he came in to 50 or so from where the boys were located, did that and then sort of dipped down the hill. But it didn't leave us with too much light left to make a play, but the boys did try and etch a little bit closer.
Yeah, we tried. We got pretty desperate. Well, I got pretty desperate, to be honest. We sort of dropped down the hill another 40 or so where we knew the hind had gone into some thicker bush. And at that point, I was like, we have nothing to lose. And I gave it my all when it came to, I was breaking brush, like trying to pretend like I was, rubbing a tree. I was roaring, like didn't have a tube or anything, but just cupping my hand. I was doing hind calls. I left it all on that mountain trying to get that man a stag. And sadly, he was not playing the game. He was on that hot hind, literally like on her ass, probably 70 meters over a little crest. And I just said to the hunter, like, if we go over that crest, he's looking straight up at us. Like he needs to come to us. And he had that girl. He was pretty content. And unless I was going to be a big bad stag coming over the hill to sort of fight him, which I couldn't do, he just wasn't going to come. And so he won this fight for now. But very happy to say that in the days following, when Ayden and I actually left and came back to New South Wales, we got a very lovely message from the hunter, our good mate, saying that he'd got his first stag on the deck, and we're actually pretty sure it was that same 5x5 stag. So obviously a huge congratulations to him for sticking it out and putting in the hard yards, but also he did get the win on the board eventually, I guess, and secure his first red stag, and a beautiful, really great stag is his first one too. One of the best ones that we saw for the couple of days that we were in that camp. So an absolute cracker to get as your first stag. So congratulations, mate. Atlas Wild helps to fuel your outdoor adventures. My personal favourite is the peach iced tea in the Rise, which is caffeinated and keeps you ultra focused while on the mountain. The electrolytes and B vitamins in there prevent muscle soreness and means that you can back it up on these extended hunts day after day. We've teamed up with Atlas Wild to get 10% off your next order by using code TWIN10. That is TWIN, 10 the number, to get 10% off your next order. Head to their website and shop today.
We did also have some more success in camp, which I'll let James touch on here, but we had a really great hunt. This was actually with another of the young boys, so this was probably more memorable, and that's probably a factor that you've got to consider here, is that we did have a young hunter with us, and that was part of the reason why this hunt obviously was successful in the end, is because we sort of not forced the matter, but we weighed up the pros and cons, and we just figured it'd be a really cool moment to share with this young hunter. But yeah, I'll let James jump into that story.
Well, I guess it was getting on in the morning this day, and we'd seen quite a few stags. We'd probably seen 5 or 6 different stags, all similar story, just being young. And yeah, we set up for this calling situation, and it was probably 9:30 or 10 o'clock. So, and did a location roar and had a roar back, and we moved in on him, and he was sort of down in the gully, and we were up sort of on the top, and we ended up setting up in a stand of trees, and sort of just said to this young fella, hey mate, like, just sit still, and when, like, if a deer or deers come in, like, don't move too much, just hang tight, like, you can move your eyes and stuff, but even try not to turn your head so much, or don't move your fingers and everything like that, like just sort of sit still, because this stag might be coming in quite close, and we're set up there on the hill, and we're roaring and carrying on and stuff, and we sort of, generally speaking, roar to locate, and then hind call to sort of draw them in, and Ayden and I are doing a few hind calls here and there, and he'd roar back, and then we'd do some more hind calls, and what we actually worked out was he had some hinds with him at the time, and so he wasn't going to sort of leave them to come up to us, and we'd had a couple of cool encounters where we had like a nice spiker come in pretty close, and we actually had those two yearlings come in and start chirping again at 30 odd meters and stuff. So that was cool for the young fella to see. But I sort of end up making the decision over probably a half an hour period of this like back and forth calling, and him not taking a step. That's like, okay, we're going to need to go to him. And I just sort of said to the young fella, like I said, hey mate, I'm sorry, but is it all right if you just sit here and we move in, as in Ayden and I, which was a pretty hard decision to make. But it was just one of these things that, like, to be honest, I even felt taking Ayden was a bit of an overkill. Like, obviously we were doing it because it's like we film all our hunts. But like the amount of open country in the sun that I had to cross with, like we knew there was probably at least 6 to 8 hinds there, and the stag, whatever satellites we couldn't see and stuff. And so I was very, very concerned about us getting busted, moving in across this fairly open face in the sun, down to get sort of into this stag's lair to try and hopefully draw him into bow range. And he was like, yeah, mate, that's all good. Like I'll stay here or whatever. And so what Ayden and I did was essentially I would, at that stage, I then sort of wanted to imitate a challenge, I guess, because we had roared a couple of times. So like we had sort of put a picture in his mind that there was hinds there and stuff, but there also was a stag with those hinds. And now I was trying to emulate that I was a stag moving down the hill onto his location. And so I would roar, and we had so much open country and leaf litter that when I would roar, Ayden and I would take, as I was roaring, we would try and take 3 or 4 steps at a time, to move across this really crunchy leaf litter, because he's probably only 150 to 200 meters away. So we did have a little bit of broken sight and a little bit of timber and stuff, but definitely like pretty much in full vision the whole time, and that's why we had to sort of leave the young fella behind. But yeah, we ended up dropping down into the gully, and the hinds had actually moved off. I think that one of the other satellites had sort of tried to take them, and the hinds, like we'd seen them move off, and we'd heard him move across roaring, and he was pretty much like a greyhound, nose to the ground, trying to find where these hinds had gone. And we sort of jumped in and essentially took advantage of the situation and gave him what he was looking for, in the sense of, we gave him a couple of hind calls, and he was very invested. Like I think one of those girls was probably in season, because he was a nose to the ground trying to find this hind. But he obviously, having lost his hinds, wasn't going to miss up the opportunity for a free hind that was only 100 meters away. And so he sort of did a weird, I guess, like instead of coming straight into us, he did a bit of a big arc, like with his nose to the ground, smelling where these other hinds had gone. And we just sort of put ourselves in this path, and we set up maybe 30 meters or not even 20 meters, or probably 30 meters above the gully that he had to cross and come in to us. And I remember seeing him on the opposite ridge, and to be honest, like he was probably he was one of the nicest stags that we saw on this couple of days of hunting. I did know that he wasn't like a giant stag, but it was one that I was more than happy to take. And I think also just making it a bit more special having like the little fella there and it being sort of one of his first bow hunts for red stags and stuff. And so definitely an animal that I wanted to take. And he came in to cross down the gully and lost vision. And that's when we didn't really have a lot of cover. And so I took advantage and sort of drew back, probably more anticipating that he was going to, at this stage, he sort of straightened up and take a bit of a straight line into us. But what he ended up doing was sort of popping up out of the gully and then walking across. And I probably did have a shot there as soon as he did that. But I just didn't, I didn't take the shot. I didn't feel that confident. And so I held, and then he ended up going into some really thick sort of higher grass. And on the film, it looks, I'm probably about maybe a foot and a half lower than Ayden. So on the footage, it looks like there's a shot there for him. But for me, I couldn't really see where the bottom of his like chest was and everything like that. And like it sort of made it hard for me to anticipate like exactly where to be shooting. Like it wasn't that I didn't want to shoot through. Like I was confident that even if my arrows hit the grass or whatever, it was more just anticipating where he was. And so he ended up like rubbing a tree, giving out a couple more roars. And then he started sort of walking parallel to us in the bottom, and I ended up just giving him a little hind call. So he came running up the hill and just sent the pilot cut and the day 6 shaft straight through. And it was a pretty tight, it was a quartering on shot really. And I'd say I probably got half a shaft of arrow, but what I've done is I've sort of broken straight through the shoulder there and straight into the boiler room, and he's probably ran maybe 70 meters down the gully and up the other side before tumbling back into the gully. The hard thing about all of that was, I guess I ended up drawing back, like we reviewed the footage, and it's probably just a good indication that I'd end up holding at full draw for 1 minute and 50 seconds, which was not something that I'd anticipated for, but it was just something I had to do to get the shot that I was confident with. And so, being able to, like, I'd done a lot of practice obviously before the rut, like as you can tell, we take hunting very seriously. And so, I was shooting a lot leading up to the rut and still during the rut to make sure that, I'm confident with my shooting and building up that strength to be able to hold your bow back. Not that I anticipate that I'm going to need to hold for 1 minute 50 on every shot. And that's probably the longest I've ever had to hold it back for. But, if the circumstances does arrive that you have to, then it was confident to do so and then take the shot afterwards. So, definitely something that bow hunters should practice doing those longer holds. It was awesome to get, a stag on the deck. Like we'd had some really, really cool encounters and having that young fella with us on that hunt, I think just, was the cherry on the cake and really topped off an awesome couple of days and awesome morning of hunting.
Yeah, I think the actual stag or animal itself was less of, the accolade than the actual atmosphere in camp, sharing this butchering experience with the young lad. And we packed out all that meat, got to meet up with the other hunters and the dads and the other son, and they were all absolutely stoked for us to hear that we'd had a really successful morning hunt. And the best thing, I think, for me over that few days was then being able to relax in camp and process. Like I think we had a bit of backstrap, tenderloins and some heart, and just made some wraps. We cooked them up on the camp chef, and basically like just got straight into it. Like it was super tender for an animal that didn't get to hang. Heart is one of those cuts of meat that is absolutely delicious. From the moment you take the animal, it's always tender. We always explain that it's got the consistency of like a calamari, or the texture of a calamari with the flavor and amazing taste that draws us into like a steak. So you get that combination of different flavors and textures. But it was great to share that with the young kids, and they just dived straight into it. And, it was cool to hear that they went back and told their mums and sisters and stuff that, yeah, we got to eat some heart and had these heart wraps. And it was just, yeah, that sort of aspect of hunting and being able to secure and process your own meats and share it with family and friends is awesome. And hopefully we can portray that in the film, just how excited everyone was to, we all sat around, we were a bit tired, to be honest, because it'd been a big morning. So we sat around, had a dog and gun coffee, cooked that food up, and then just sat there like, stuffed pigs after eating probably 1 kilo or 2 kilos of meat straight off this red deer stag.
Yeah, the camp vibes was definitely high on this hunt. Like having the boys in camp, older boys and their young sons, was really special. And like what Ayden said, like it was more so for me, the camaraderie in camp and the vibes that we had. Like it was a really, really special time. And I'll probably remember that a lot more than sort of the hunt itself. Like just the fact of taking out, a couple of different people and showing them something that Ayden, obviously they're very passionate about too, but something Ayden and I are very passionate about, and just sharing a little bit of our knowledge. But especially the eating part, like I'd actually, to be honest, never had heart in a wrap. And it was, one of the dads like, oh, we have this with a wrap, and like had it. And like normally I just cook it and put salt and pepper, and it's like smashed, between the hunters and stuff pretty quickly. But putting in a wrap was beautiful. And I think it even took away like the, what is this bit? Like you could serve that heart wrap to anyone, and I'd confidently say that they would eat it and love it, because it was just genuinely so good. But also just like what Ayden was saying, we had a bit of a meat party, and I think we cooked up the 2 tenderloins and like half a backstrap of a red stag, which is a fair bit of meat, in between like 2 young fellas and 4 or 2 dads and Ayden and I, so 6 people. Definitely counting the young lads as adults when it came to portion size, because they were hooking in, and we smashed like all this meat just with like a bit of seasoning on it, and for something like what Ayden was saying, for something that we'd pretty much shot a stag and not a couple of hours later, was then chucking that on the camp chef and cooking it up just with a bit of salt and pepper and seasoning. It was absolutely to die for. So it was a really, really awesome day, and one I'll remember for a long time. And it was just a fantastic couple of days, really, and fantastic hunt. So I guess from me, and I know Ayden, we just like to thank those guys for inviting us into their hunting camp, because it is a big gesture having a couple of people. And obviously Ayden and I, especially with the filming that we do going on, like it's not like a small thing. Like we bring a lot of gear, and we're like, oh hey mate, like sometimes we're trying to film something, like hey, can you guys keep it down for a second or whatever. So it is a big ask when we come out there, and for you guys to host us and just be so fantastic. We really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Whether you're making your way up a scree cliff or hiking a distant trail, you want to be confident in the boots that you wear. And for Ayden and I, that means Lower. We've been running the Lower Ranger GTX3s for over 5 years now, and we've never even had a blister. We've teamed up with the Lower team to extend their generosity to you to get you a unique 10% off code by using the code TWINELEMENTS10 at checkout to get 10% off your next order. We know you're going to love them.
It's that part of the show where we're going to dive into the frequently asked questions segment. So if you have any questions for the podcast, please send us an email with subject line FAQ to info@twinelements.com.au, or simply send us a message on our socials, either through Twin Elements, Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors, or James Doumtsis Outdoors, and we will obviously strive to answer them and repeat them on future episodes of the podcast, as we're getting a great reception to all of the FAQs that we're reading out. As I've said multiple times now, if you've got a question, there's a fair chance that another 20 blokes or females out there will have, the same question and be wanting it answered. So we're getting heaps of feedback saying that people are loving these, and we'll continue to do them as long as you guys have questions. So this week's first question was sent in by Ben Nielsen. He says, "Hey mate, I was listening to today's podcast and it sparked a question I've been meaning to ask. What is the time frame that the animal needs to be in the fridge/esky from the time it was harvested? For example, if I were to shoot a fallow deer on a 20-degree day, how long do I have to get it quartered and into an esky before I need to be concerned about the safety of the meat?"
And that is a fantastic question, and it's a bit of a grey one to answer in terms of, like we've already spoken on that previous podcast about sort of like E. coli, which is a fecal-borne bacteria, like replication time. So, like we said, it replicates every 25 minutes or 20 to 25 minutes at 25 degrees. So, if you've got that sort of quarter, I guess, hanging at 20 degrees, then it's going to be E. coli numbers are going to be replicating quite quickly. And so it's really important to see how clean you were, when you were quartering that animal, for example. So if you did, like if you shot an animal and it was a quartering away or quartering on shot and you pierced the gut cavity, and then you couldn't find it and it had to sit there for 8 hours in the sun and then you found it, well, the tops of those sort of hind limbs may have been exposed to a bit of gut juice and stuff like that. And so you'd probably be trying to get it into a fridge as soon as possible. And another factor is like the moisture in the animal. So this question, I guess, perfectly is answered by my red stag. So we shot it pretty much in the middle of the day. Like I think it was 9:30, 10 o'clock, might have been a bit later. And by the time we had, done all the filming and butchered and carried it out, it was probably 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So what ended up happening was I pretty much took it straight down into the creek where it was cool. And because in the shade, it's 10 degrees cooler than what the ambient temperature is. And we had a really nice breeze rolling through there. And so what I did was we had like the Agali game bags, which are strong enough to hang like elk quarters and whatnot. So they were fine to hang red deer quarters. And we just took all the quarters and the remainder of the backstrap that we hadn't eaten and the tenderloins and stuff and just hung it down there. And so all the moisture was able to drip through the bag essentially, and the wind dried that really quickly. So the quarters get a nice crust on it, which is going to be sort of its first line of defense against bacterial load and whatnot, because moisture, having reduced moisture prevents replication as well. But also having that breeze and also being in the shade, I was confident to leave that there. So we ended up leaving those quarters there until like late into the afternoon the next day, when one of the hunters was actually leaving, and he actually took all that meat back because we didn't have anywhere to put it, because we were meant to be hunting for a couple more days, and he was going to he took that back and actually gave it to Maddie from Becoming a Bow Hunter podcast, and then Maddie was able to utilize all that meat. But yeah, so essentially, if you shoot any animal and it's to 20-degree day, I would confidently hang it for a day, even potentially 2 days if it's a dire situation, in the shade, making sure that it's not like shade for a couple of hours in the morning and then like full sun for the middle of the day and then, shade for the hour or whatever. Like it's got to be really true. Like find a deep, dark gully with a good breeze, and I would confidently hang meat there for a day or two. But there's so many considerations in how long you can hang it for. And like, if we're up in deer camp hunting chill deer and it's like 35 degrees in the middle of the day, well, yeah, in the shade, it's still going to be probably 20 to 25, which means I wouldn't really want to hang it there for, even a day. Like, and maybe if you shoot something at lunch, you might hang it overnight. By the next morning, you're going to want to chuck it in a fridge or an esky or something with some ice. So there's so many factors with like how the animal was shot, how clean you were with butchering, and also the just ambient temperature and humidity. But yeah, for most rut conditions on the East Coast with 20-degree days and pretty cool overnight temperatures, I'd happily hang an animal in a really shady spot with a good breeze for a day or two without any concerns. So our next FAQ was sent in by Dean Wood. Thanks for that, mate. And his question was, when do the bucks and does go to the scrape? Do they still go and feed each night or remain on the scrape?
So I guess it's very important here to just acknowledge that the bucks are the ones primarily that like possess and obtain the territory of a scrape. And generally the does won't actually go to the scrape until they're starting to come into estrus and cycling. Just because the does, as we've expressed in that fallow deer biology sort of podcast many moons ago, pre-rut, we discussed that fallow deer does have a bit of a selection criteria. So they're the ones that actually initiate breeding, and they're the ones that will go to different scrapes, look at the bucks and go, yep, I like the look of him. He looks like a successful, male that I want to choose to mate with. So this is most common, obviously, in like late March in most places, going up through mid-April with like, that first, second week of April in most places probably being the peak rut. What you'll find is when does do start going to the scrapes, the bucks will often be chasing them around a lot more, and that rutting activity will sort of increase. But what we've found is that the deer will definitely be moving away and feeding from those scrapes of an evening. But the bucks quite often will stay there, or if there's a hot hind, go and court those hinds and follow them around. But his objective is to get them back to that scrape to breed. And to be honest, deer are very good foragers and browse and things like that, where the whole time a buck might be sitting there on his scrape croaking and going crazy from first light until lunchtime. You'll find that the does and yearlings and things like that are feeding and browsing and distracted by satellite bucks, and the bucks more so won't be feeding, and they're just running on their energy reserves that they've acquired over summer, whereas the does definitely have a bit more of a pattern ability to them. So wherever they have been feeding pre-rut, they'll probably go down to, and you'll catch them there each morning, and then they often go up to the scrapes and things like that, where they'll be getting bred hopefully by the bucks. But once it's on, and the does and bucks will sort of inhabit the scrapes a lot more closely. So hopefully that sort of, I guess, answers your question a little bit. But they do, they're not definitely defined by like being on the scrape all the time. They do still have their requirements. The next question was also sent in by Dean, and he just says, if I walk through an area, will my scent ruin that area, and should I avoid it for a while?
So, of all the characteristics, I guess, or features that may scare deer from an area, whether it be being seen or being smelt, I think the one of least concern for me is like when you've got boots on the ground. I'd probably be more hesitant of where I guess, go to the toilet and urinate and defecate, especially when you're obviously spending like all day out in the mountain. Everyone, I'd be very surprised if you told me they don't pee out in the bush. So, going to the toilet close to a scrape, for example, or where, like a prominent bedding area is for the red deer that you're chasing is probably not the best idea. Going somewhere that's less likely is going to be a suggestion. But walking through areas, to be honest, it's something that I am not really concerned about at all. Because I've had even this rut, how many times have Ayden and I walked through an area and then called and then had red stags come in, honestly, within 5 minutes from that direct line and walk that game trail and not smelt us. I think if it's like an area that's in the sun, your scent sort of gets, and this is going to be a poor expression for it, but like almost burnt away quite quickly. And so it disappears, the scent vapor, which is not really a thing, gets removed. So yeah, boots specifically, like I'm not really worried about leaving a lot of scent and stuff on the ground. More where I urinate, defecate, but certainly, yeah, like if I'm not going to be walking through scrapes and stuff if I don't need to. Like, you don't. Why take the risk if you don't have to? But I'm definitely more worried about just like in general hunting pressure. So being seen by deer, being smelt by deer is going to change their behavior and change them, like avoiding an area potentially a lot more than them perhaps like smelling your boots on the ground 2 hours after you've walked through an area. That's something not really that I consider. But definitely all those other aspects is something that runs through my mind and I calculate when I'm out there on the mountain hunting. And our last FAQ from Dean Wood again was, on this hunt, I was following a croaking buck when the doe saw me and they left. I never heard him again. Would he have left the area or just stopped croaking?
So it's hard to know, but from past experiences, we obviously filmed Fallow Frenzy a couple of years ago, and we hunted for 14 days on the mountain hunting deer in very low densities. So we were targeting pretty much 2 very specific bucks, and we did unfortunately bump them, scare their does multiple times. But because I would say in general the hunting pressure was quite low, and most of the time it was more of a visual or audio cue. They weren't typically winding us. We did get repeat encounters on these deer. So what I would say is that if it's the first time bumping the deer or the doe and the hunting pressure is low, I'd be pretty confident to say that he will return to that area or won't get spooked out of the area completely, especially considering if there's like a scrape nearby that he's actually been patterned to using. And that's where we spoke about it on the Fallow Deer podcast a little while back, that we've actually implemented sometimes when, there might be 10 does on a scrape, and that buck's, distracted, and, you might scare 2 or 3 of the does that are right up close to you at 20 meters, and then they run down the hill. There's a fair chance that buck will actually lose those does in the brush as they run around, flee, muck around and whatnot. So we often use that as an opportunity to run into that scrape, get set up 20 meters away because we're bow hunters. If we were rifle hunting, we could afford to be a little bit further away. And quite often the case, that buck, when he loses the does eventually or gets back to the middle of the day or later on in that morning, will actually come back up, refresh his scrape, and then sometimes they'll even bed down there. So in terms of, being able to hunt him again, I don't think he would have left the area. Definitely not if he had no idea you were there or never saw you or smelt you or anything like that. If it was just the doe, generally there's plenty of does out there that won't leave the area again, unless it's like the lead doe or such. But I would say that red deer in general are a lot more, heightened to hunting pressure just because they're not defined by having a scrape or something like a fallow buck where they're a bit territorial and have all this invested energy and time into a specific spot on the mountain. So I think there's a fair chance you'll see him again. And yeah, best of luck with it. Hopefully you can tag out on him. And thank you very much for sending in that array of questions. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, legends, for tuning in to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. I hope you guys are enjoying these hunting stories and recaps, taking plenty of lessons out of them, but also enjoying a bit of camp camaraderie that Ayden and I have shared in the last couple of weeks. We've had a really, really awesome ride. We've got some incredible footage that we can't wait to share with you guys, but we've also had some truly spectacular animals hit the deck. So it's just been an awesome time out in the bush. But we've actually received a little bit more news this morning about something that we're very excited about and can't wait to share with you guys. And that is that Ayden and I have both drawn general deer and elk tags in Montana this year, coming 2025. So Ayden and I are going to be heading back. We're going to hopefully get a few critters on the deck over there and film some more US-based content for you guys to share and watch in the future. So we can't wait to get back over there. It feels like a little bit of a second home for me in Montana now, and it's definitely got a little special spot in my heart. So I was very excited to see that we'd drawn, and I actually can't wait to get Ayden over there with his bow this time and hopefully film him take an awesome elk like he did with me 2 years ago now. So can't wait to get back over. September can't come soon enough, even though we've got all these running red deer and fallow deer in Australia. I already counting down the days to get back over there. So going to be plenty sweaty Stairmaster sessions between now and then, but Ayden and I are definitely keen to get over and hopefully be successful on those hunts.
Yeah, personally for me, I set a bit of a goal for the year. You probably would have heard it in our resolutions podcast early in the year, and we were just checking in and touching base regarding some of our dreams and aspirations for 2025. And I had a couple. So obviously, like, my running was one that was very consistent, like a daily sort of thing is what I wanted to be running and putting kilometers in the legs, just because I knew that would carry over to just general fitness. But one of the other things I set out was to hopefully be able to draw these tags and get out to a new place and be able to take my bow over to the US this year and target an elk or a mule deer or a whitetail. And basically the goal was to take a new species. So there's obviously a lot of things that have got to go right to achieving that, but drawing this tag in Montana is the first and probably biggest step in the right direction. So now that we've done that, the drill, we'll put the work in to obviously hopefully go over there and achieve it. But there's so much to do between now and actually setting boots on the ground, but the anticipation of this hunt is pretty next level, and I'm just really excited to go over and repeat that and do it again with my best mate and someone that we've obviously forged a lot of memories together on the mountains and stuff. And I think the US and just the magnitude of these hunts is something that speaks for itself. So
another hunt that we're super proud of is our Northern Territory hunting series, which will be dropping in the near future on our YouTube channel. But what we have got going is our 20K YouTube subscriber giveaway. And that is all revolved around our Northern Territory highlight reel, which we've got pinned to our YouTube channel. So if you want to jump over there and enter the draw, what you need to do is, with 25 words or less, write where you'd like to hunt and what species on that Northern Territory highlight reel. And you'll go in the draw to win thousands of dollars of prizes that brands that we work with and love have generously donated to support us. And so you could be in the draw to win some lower boots, an option sight, some day 6 gear in the form of a knife and some arrows. You've got Cayuga broadheads, OzCaf Energy, Atlas Wild, Dog and Gun, Kimbo knife sharpener. It's all there. It's all going to be going to one lucky winner. So jump in, do a comment, tell us where you'd love to go for a hunt, and be in the draw to win this awesome prize pool.
Next week's podcast switches things up as we shift from South East Queensland, where you've obviously heard and been a part of these Red Deer Camp podcasts with us, and where we've hunted with a range of other hunters in some pretty cool atmosphered camps. But next week we go back to New South Wales in search of hopefully a giant. We're basically changing up from quantity to quality. So we're going to be doing a lot of miles and covering thousands of acres of private property in search of basically one or two deer that could be on the place. So this is a podcast that you simply don't want to miss. After weeks of grinding it out, searching these properties for a giant stag, we've actually had an arrow find its mark and secured a new personal best red stag. So please tune in next week for all of the action from our final Red Deer report.
Once again, thank you for all your love and support, guys. We appreciate everyone getting involved, sharing the podcast, especially if you've learnt something, and putting it up on your story or Instagram. Telling your mates and just building this community that we're trying to build here at Twin Elements. Obviously, as you can tell, we're very passionate about trying to give back to you guys and quicken your learning curve, but also build on the hunting community and show it in the best light possible, whether it be through our YouTube videos or on social media or this podcast. So thank you to everyone that subscribes, reviews, and rates the podcast. We really, really do appreciate it. And thank you for all the support and love that you guys are showing on this platform. It really does sort of lighten up our hearts, and we really do appreciate it. It's really special for Ayden and I. So thank you once again, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast.
Cheers, legends. We'll see you next week.